What do you guys? Anybody have any opinions about the performances? Do you enjoy them? Let's not forget the Dionysiac roots to drama. The fact that Dionysus is the god of drama, and the connections between Dionysus and the notion of the earth deity and of the god of wine. But ha ha ha! These days, when we hear that, we're like, yay, the god of drunkenness, the god of getting crazy and getting stupid and whatever. But no, there's a lot more to it, and I kind of hinted at it either last time or the time before. The idea that what we're dealing with is aspects of the human psyche that are already hinted at in Aeschylus in terms of coming to terms with irrationality, with Clytemnestra maybe especially, and then I guess by extension Orestes as well. With the Furies represent, we'll get into it, but what do they represent? What do they symbolize? That's an important question. In connection with this idea of resolving all of this by means of finally, we're in Athens. Is there a little bit of propaganda to this? Let's get real, right? Okay, yay! Let's solve this horrible problem that's been going on for generations and generations and generations. Forget about 3 plays, and then how do we do it? Get to Athens, and then Athena very symbolically becomes although I'm jumping ahead, the deciding vote. So that is just so dripping with symbolism. Yeah, absolutely. So that's on the surface the events that we point to say what the plot of the play is, which should give you an idea, because you've actually read the play, of how ridiculous it is for us to settle for nothing but a paraphrase of a play so complex, and with such a great amount of undertow to the resonance of the meaning of the choruses and the imagery and things like that. So this is true for all literature, by the way. You can't whittle great literature down by just saying what it's about. But at least for a class like this, we need to situate ourselves in terms of being the main details. Okay. As far as the choruses go, you remember that the whole phenomenon of the chorus comes out of the idea that you had lyric poetry, it's all counts, by the way. One of the subgenres of lyric poetry is chorus or choral poetry, and you have everybody singing the same thing, and that's what you have in the chorus. Every blue moon, you'll have a chorus member who will step out and pretty much do what Thespis did, and step out from the chorus and say something. But usually, the chorus sings as one, as a kind of, this is the cliche. It's not always true, but kind of the consciousness of the audience is often how the chorus is portrayed. That's the idea, is that the chorus is pretty much vocalizing what we, the observant audience members, notice, or should, at least according to the writer of the words put into the mouths of the chorus, when we watch the play. The chorus can sometimes be just in the background, saying things that it's fairly clear, although there's always argument about this kind of stuff, that they're not intended to be heard by the characters. In that case, they're not going to have a direct influence on what happens usually. But when they interact with the characters, they're no less legit as anyone else to influence, if not determine, the course of the action. Okay, so that will happen quite often. Okay, what is the theme of the entire Oresteia? And this is definitely open for debate. There are a lot of people who write books about this, let alone articles. But why the hell bother? What do the Furies want? The Furies is just the fancy. The Eumenides is what they become once they see the light, if you will, at the end of the play. But the Furies is usually how they're referred to. So what do the Furies want from Orestes? Is it only about justice, getting revenge, or is there one step further about the purport of the play? It gets kind of philosophical, right? It gets kind of like, what is justice? At least, unless I'm reading in. It seems to me that it's a beautiful, Eumenides especially. This has to do with what is justice, and what is the answer to that, do you think? What do you draw from Aeschylus in terms of what is his answer, if any, to that question, what is justice? What does Orestes use as an argument for why his murder of Mommy is not as important as Mommy's murder of Daddy? What's the argument that Orestes cites? Which hero is Orestes compared to directly once and then indirectly another time? I don't want to say more than that because that would give away the answer. You know what I'm saying? There are two, I think they're both in the Eumenides, if not, maybe one in the Koiphoroi, and there are four major pre-Homeric heroes that would be likely to come up in a context like that. There's Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Jason. Those are the ones almost always brought up before Homer comes. There's one hero who was directly compared to Perseus is brought up. Very important stuff. Again, mentioned numbered 3,000 of the fact that if you have some background in mythology, that this stuff will resonate a little bit more for you, but it's not a handicap not to, so you're okay. But the idea here is that Perseus is the very first of the Greek heroes. Okay, that's a brash statement. He's the very first, at least of the famous Greek heroes. Okay, the best way to put it in an objective sense, as far as we can tell from the evidence, the ancient Greeks believed portrayed Perseus as being the very first of their heroes. All right, and so he has that advantage of being the very first. So there's that resonance back to the ancestral connection to the past, but also later on, there's mention of none other than who is Perseus most famous for overcoming for Medusa. And Medusa is mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, near the end of the Eumenides, right? Or close. So the chorus is equating Orestes with Perseus the Gorgon slayer. Okay? So you have this really relatively subtle allusion to this early hero, thereby getting across the idea that at least the chorus thought of Orestes as a kind of Perseus figure, and by extension, a kind of hero. Okay, so he's the hero. He's the guy who kills Clytemnestra, his mother, and that first Athena and then later the citizens of Athens the other way around. The citizens of Athens and then later Athena, when she has the final decision, apparently there's a sanction here. This idea that, okay, we're done. You know, it kind of reminds me of the notion of what it means, the whole immigration issue, and when you draw the line between when those who, forget America, I don't want to get all, I don't want to particularize it. Any country, there's always debate about when does it start? When do those who are of a certain group in a certain country get to say, we're the indigenous people, or not necessarily indigenous, but we're the people who determine, immigration issues, etc. And when, despite the fact that there are people before you who no longer have that status, and why is that? Okay, it feels that way to me a little bit when it comes to the very subtle, but I think significant distinction made between Orestes and his apparent right to kill his mother versus his mother's lack of a right to kill Agamemnon. So what's going on there? It's a weird analogy, I admit, it's a stretch, but it feels to me like, and here's the only thing that I'm making a comparison between, that it almost feels like an arbitrary judgment. In our eyes today, aren't we imposing anachronistic notions on the past? Shouldn't we do our best to see things from their eyes rather than our own? Well, guess what? It's hard to navigate, or negotiate is a better word for it, negotiate these things. So when people who do what I do for a living, actually writing articles and books, etc., on this kind of stuff, we need to really be careful about how we establish from where our value judgments, more than anything else, come from. And if you bring contemporary perspectives on things, you need to make it clear that you're doing that, and to differentiate between that and the way that you understand those in the past to have seen the world, and do the best you can to kind of negotiate those. It's not easy. It's very tricky, especially given the fact that there are two opposite types of problems. One is that we are too close to things in our time from the standpoint of so-called objective scholarship. There's no such thing, but as close as you can be. Whereas we are too far away from them. We only have a relatively small amount of material to go by to say, the Greeks believe this, the Greeks believe that. We always have to be careful to say, in the minuscule amount of stuff left to us from the ancient Greeks, and it is very minuscule. We'll get more into that as we get through the semester. But for example, Sophocles wrote and performed over 100 plays in the 5th century BC, and we have 7 of them. Aeschylus, over 100. We have 7 of them. Euripides, over 100. We have 19 of them. Aristophanes, over 100, and we have 12 of his, I think. So very relatively small amount of what we're considered to be the greatest of all the literature. Imagine how little we have of the things that we're just considered to be shit, like big deal, like journalistic type stuff, just more everyday, reporting of things as opposed to art. So we have even a lot less of that. So it's hard for us to make these value judgments in terms of the Greeks on that level. On another level, it's very easy, for me at least, I every once in a while show my biases, and I already told you, you don't need to be an overt feminist or anti-feminist in order to acknowledge the fact that in 5th century BC Athens, it's just show me an example where I'm wrong, that what I already told you was true. Women not only didn't have political power, they didn't have any say over their own lives, in 5th century Athens. It got better as time went on, and in Rome it got much better. But in early Greece, from the Archaic to the classical period, and probably before that, but we don't have enough evidence to be sure in the prehistory of Greece. But this is the way it was, and so we can't help but to acknowledge those facts, however we want to interpret them. If anything, the sanctity of marriage is called into question near the end of the Eumenides, isn't it? In the sense that, all right, they were married, but that's nothing compared to blood. Blood is what it's about, and the idea that Orestes is, that's one argument, and then the other one is that the more the gender side, or actually, the gender side of things in terms of Clytemnestra, quote, just, unquote, being a bearer of children. I mean, that's pretty brash. That's pretty straightforward. That's all women are, compared to men. They're the real family. They're the real. Remember that near the end of the Eumenides that came out in Orestes' mouth, and it wasn't objected to by Athena, maybe surprisingly, considering other narratives that she plays a part in. She's known to be a staunch defender of women, as well as her favorite men. Like Odysseus, etc. The chorus just really juices Orestes to go through with it. Does this guy remind you? I think we're all familiar with Hamlet, aren't we? If there's any play that I can assume we're all familiar with, yeah. Do you have a Hamlet vibe at all? Somewhat, yeah. Would you guys go as far as to say he's on the fence? Maybe a little bit of hesitancy, isn't there? So it's not like a Hamlet thing where it's like the whole play consists of him, am I to do it or not, to be or not to be, blah, 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 all that, It's not quite as much of that, but it does seem, I agree that it does seem that is at least an element. You have this idea of the chorus, certainly, as you say, influencing him to go through with it. But he seems like he maybe needs a little coaxing as well, so it's probably not superfluous. Realize, you guys, this is the only trilogy we still possess, okay? Every tragedy was part of a trilogy, but we only have one out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that were performed over 100 years in Athens, okay? So it's debatable how many years, but roughly that, okay? So it changes for each play. So there will be, for the rest of the semester, we're not going to have the advantage of being able to read multiple plays from the same, or even 2 plays from the same trilogy. So the chorus of Argive elders, that just means from Argos, are the chorus for Agamemnon, the very first play. And then the koiphoroi, which is the Greek term for libation bearers, in that case, it's foreign serving women. And there's a lot of debate about what that means, foreign in what sense, okay? And then finally, the chorus of Eumenides, the Furies, that's more straightforward and predictable, is that the Furies are the chorus in the, most famously, in the Eumenides. Again, I might be reading in here, but it seems to me also that given the, now I'm starting to think maybe not so covert reference to Perseus, This is Aeschylus' way of saying, oh, Orestes deserves to be considered to be a kind of hero. A little scary to say, given what happened and all that. But and that's what a hero does: not overreact, not lose their cool, as you say, but rather just stand there and kind of seek the truth rather than only for his advantage, for its own sake. Of course, this gets into definition. It brings up the question, what is a hero? And before you think that's a frivolous question, realize that probably the most important classicist living at Harvard, Greg Naj, wrote a whole book for 600 pages, What is a Hero? And he still didn't come up with an answer. So these are questions that deserve trying to unpack the best we can. But in general, yeah, I would go as far as to say that Orestes does have the rep as being a kind of hero, but a different type than a Homeric hero or a pre-Homeric hero. Do realize that what you have read, and it is an accomplishment. I said this to the Homer people last semester when they finished both the Iliad and the Odyssey. You finished, if you did it already. If not, go ahead and do it today. But you finished the only trilogy we have from ancient Greece, still in our possession. So good job. And here's some really good news. We'll go a little bit early today. Some really good news is this is as hard as it's going to get, y'all, in this class. This is way as hard as it's going to get. As far as understanding things, it gets much easier once we get to Euripides, and a little bit easier when we get to Sophocles. So good job.